For me, the Grenfell story, this tragedy in 3 acts, started before the fire, the night of the fire, and now we're in the 3rd act, the period after the fire.
You escaped with your life on the morning of the fire. How does it feel that there are still so many buildings which are just as dangerous as Grenfell that are still everywhere?
It fills me with absolute, complete and utter dread. It makes me very, very angry, and it makes me very fearful of, another Grenfell will happen. It is only a matter of time as long as you have these cladding on these buildings. My name's Eddie Daffarn.
Wrapped in a blanket, I first spoke to Eddie Daffarn after he escaped from the 16th floor of the tower. Stuck in the smoke outside his front door, he'd almost given up hope until a firefighter bumped into him by accident.
I think about it a lot. I'm very grateful to be alive, but so many people lost their lives.
After the fire, some people called him the Grenfell Prophet. In a blog he wrote with another resident, they predicted a catastrophic event at the tower 8 months before the tragedy. How does it sit with you that you foretold, in a way, a catastrophic event and it actually happened?
How do I feel about that now? I mean, like I feel about many of the things that were written in the blog. Had we been listened to, there would have been a very different outcome. And that's now what needs to change in all social housing. Everyone who lives in social housing should be treated with respect and dignity, because we're all humans. We all have a right to housing.
At the inquiry, Daffarn's name is often mentioned, but Grenfell's landlord ignored his warnings, dismissing him as an antagonist and rebel resident.
Had we been treated with respect and dignity, had we been listened to, Grenfell would not have happened. The Grenfell Action Group blog that was written by Francis O'Connor and myself, it was a prediction, a non-functioning organisation dealing with high-rise buildings, having no concern for health and safety.
But his focus now is the government.
We've come across kind of incompetence and indifference on a governmental level that I would never have guessed was possible. There are still buildings, 318 buildings in the UK with the same ACM cladding that was on Grenfell. So every single night in 318 buildings, people are going to sleep with this cladding on, this liquid paraffin that covers these buildings. And, if it was 3 months after Grenfell, you could think, maybe it takes a bit of time, but 3.5 years after Grenfell is shocking.
The government say they've provided £1.5 billion to remove flammable cladding from buildings.
The government have provided the funds to remove some of the cladding from some of the buildings, but the fact that not all of the cladding has been removed from all of the buildings shows that this isn't quite working, and it needs more than just saying we've provided £1.5 billion. It needs a focus. It needs a kind of like a rolling up of the sleeves and a getting on with the job. And my assessment of the government is that they aren't capable of that. And I think that, during the COVID crisis, when we heard that the government were going to get PPE to the front line in 3 weeks, anyone who's been involved with the struggle to get cladding off these buildings laughed out loud. This is a government that isn't capable of delivering these kind of relatively simple organisational functions.
You've spoken of Grenfell 2 being in the post. Do you think that is still true?
It is absolutely true, and it is a form of Russian roulette that the government play every single day, every single evening, while people are sleeping. And it's not only the 318 buildings we've mentioned with ACM cladding, buildings under 18 metres, different types of cladding and flammable materials on buildings, and no serious focus by the government to remove this cladding. For me, change and the legacy that comes out of Grenfell is the most important, and that's where I think that we are all finding the least progress. Having presented our arguments to the government in the most, I use a word like cooperative, but we were, when we could have just sat and screamed at them legitimately, we didn't. We organised, we sat, we put together the most cogent, reasonable arguments, and they failed to deliver on those, and that really hurts.